seem to be having a certain trend of commercialization and privatization of education, and what the end result or effects could be on issues of access, general affordability, and then quality of education that could influence national development and then production output. Well, let me have some key people from the sector who are here as great conveners of CAPCO. We're talking about the campaign against privatization and commercialization of education. And I have my CAPCO reps right here in the studio. Let me just speak to Richard Covey. Thank you. And you are one of the key people advocating this. Yes. And also, I have Divine Pe, who is with Africa Education Watch. He's a regular on the show sometimes after Kofi Asare. And then Festus Longmate, also with the Ghana National Education Campaign Coalition back in the day, but also is a great educationist as part of this as well. How are you?
You are doing well.
Very well. Okay, now Richard, let me start with you. Why is this a concern? Is it because you have numbers that you have researched on that is indicating that we should be worried?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers. Yeah, it's a great concern that every Ghanaian should be worried about, because we have a country where currently, if you look at the statistics out there that is put out by Ghana Statistical Service, we are looking at 1.2 million children who are yet to be enrolled in school. These are children between the ages of 4 to 17 years. That's a great number. Then we are also looking at some between 300 to 400,000 of them that have been in school but have to drop out due to various concerns. So the campaign basically is about getting government to commit to its constitutional mandates, where every child of school-going age is supposed to be enrolled and there should be access. So the issues that we are campaigning against has to do with the fact that it got to a point when we started implementing the FQ policy, because the burden of providing education government sees to be a bit of burdensome. So they're trying to shift that responsibility to the private sector. Now the private sector is coming in not to complement per se, but then it's also creating a situation where some of the communities, due to the economic status of the parents, couldn't afford the kind of private schools that our children have. Then they came up with a concept of low fee for profit schools. Even this low fee for profit schools, where the children pay on daily basis, they pay as you go. This concept too came, and then some multinationals, we're talking about Global Partnership for Education, USAID, and others, beginning to sponsor some Ghanaians to set up some of these schools in the rural community. So you go to areas like Kaswa, you have a number of these schools, we call them Omega School franchise. You go to the northern sector and other areas, they are trying to push some of these schools there. And the question is, even if it's 1 cedi a day, we still have a number of Ghanaians who could not afford. And that is what is accounting for the 1.42 million children who are not yet in school. Okay. And so as a country, if we are talking about development and then you have citizens who are not being enrolled in school, the burden of managing these people will be more expensive than those that are in school that we are spending 10 cedis a year on. And so that is the reason for this campaign, and then we need to draw the public attention to it and get the policymakers to look at it. So we are basically calling for investment in public education so that I can deliver the kind of education that will propel this country into its growth.
And Divine Pe, how did we get here?
All right, Robert, thank you, and good morning to viewers. The state has the mandate of providing education as far as access is concerned, and Article 25 actually provides that education shall be free, compulsory, and universal. And you look at the directive principle of state policy also enjoins the government to take steps to make education universal, basic education specifically. But I know that the framers of the Constitution are also clear in their mind that the private sector has a role to play in order for us to ensure that universality. And therefore, the Clause 2 of Article 25 also welcomes the participation of private sector in the delivery of education in Ghana. And we can't underestimate the role the private sector plays in access and also in terms of quality. They have done so well. In fact, 30% of children currently enrolled in primary schools are in the private sector or the private school. And then if you go to the rural areas, 20% of schools over there are private schools. So their roles over the years cannot be underestimated. We acknowledge the roles the private sector is playing in the delivery of basic education. But when we see a point of time that the delivery of education is shifting more to that of the private sector, and then the state is neglecting more on its duty to ensure that education is more of access to the citizen, then we need to be worried. And then also where we see the point of persons commodifying education to the point of pricing, to point that price some of the children out of education, then we also genuinely be worried. So as EduWatch team member, or for us at EduWatch, our concern are two. One, the delivery of private education should not price persons that do not have access to public education. The price should be moderate, reasonable, such that even if public school is not accessible in that environment, the child will be able to have access. And number two, it shouldn't be that because government has invested low in public education, that is why a parent has no option than to send the ward to private school. Going to private school should be a choice, not because I don't have an option, because there's no public.
It shouldn't become the norm.
Yeah, it shouldn't become the norm. Public school should be available, but if I want to go to a private school, then that's a decision. Because if you look at it, one of our studies reveals that 70% of parents that we interviewed said that enrolling their wards in private school isn't because they wanted to, but because of the nature of public schools when it comes to the quality aspect, and number two, their non-availability, especially when you come to our urban communities. For instance, when you look at recent data within the last decade, that is 2020.
Continue.
All right, within the last decade, when we look at from 2010 to 2020, the growth of private school across the nation has been 128%, while the growth of public school has just been 11%. So you see that private schools are growing on a higher rate. And then also when we come to the urban area, look at private school growth, 170% growth within the last decade, 2010 to 2020. But actually in Accra here, public school grew just by 1%. In fact, from 2010 to 2030, we added just 6 public schools, primary schools to be specific. So when you see such a situation, a parent will have no option than to send their ward to private school. And generally, parents in poorest community, they spend about 30% of their household income on private education. So the point is simple. We need to regulate private education, especially the fees, so that it can also be affordable to persons that do not have access to public education. And then also government needs to improve access to public education so that it will become an option if I want to send my wards to private school.
Now, Festus, how do we reverse this? By way of policy intervention and all that? How do we reverse that?
Yeah, I think building on the basis laid by my colleagues, the campaign is not to say that we are against private participation in education service delivery. But what we are saying is that it is responsibility of government to provide public education, and education must not be commodified. Now, the problem we are having currently especially has to do with the fast-growing communities like maybe the Kaswa area, for instance. And they really don't make provision for the construction of school infrastructure in these areas. So you see private individuals taking advantage of that gap to establish schools in the name of providing low-fee education to these people, and they rather end up exploiting the parents. Like my brother mentioned, the Omega School franchise, for instance. Currently, they have handed over to, I think, a different organization, but then they tend to be taking their monies on daily basis. At the end of the day, when you calculate the daily amount, in total, you realize that they end up paying more.
Okay.
You understand? They end up paying more. So they come with the pretense that they are coming to make education accessible. But then they end up exploiting the parent. Now, the situation is because of the lack of public schools in these areas. But then we are all aware that education is a right. And there is no child. In fact, every child in every community in this country should be able to access a public school. It is a right. But then when you go to a lot of these areas, we don't have public schools for these children to access. For instance, I spoke to one lady recently, and this lady has 2 children. And these children are home now. Why? Because they went to she decided to send her children to a public school. And there's no space to accommodate these children because of overcrowded classrooms. You understand? Because of overcrowded classrooms. Now, the only option left for this lady is to send the children to a private school. Now, because she cannot afford the cost of the private education, she is currently keeping the children at home. You understand? So the problem has to do with the infrastructure gap.
Okay.
And all is dependent on education financing. So you realize that over the years, the budget allocation for basic education, that I'm talking about the education sector budget, allocation for basic education has been dropping. It has been dwindling over the years.
I know the Minister of Education will fight with you on this because the last time you called me, we had a comprehensive talk on this.
Yeah, but it's a fact. The data
in terms of the budgetary allocation.
Exactly. So, and of course, without enough resources.
But he made an argument that apart from budgetary allocation, you have other subsectors supporting education. So if you do an aggregation of those budgets as well, you cannot say it falls within the 4% or under 4% period. I know what they educate, but at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. I think we need to do a bigger conversation on this subject. I think it's a real need. It's a real need by way of the narrative or the concern. Yeah. The reality is, as an incentive, government, not only in this government, the government has always had now, as part of the incentive, you have 30% of first choice schools or choice for private public schools going during the placement period for junior high school levels, for 2 public schools. That's an incentive, is that not it?
Yeah, it's an incentive, and due to the infrastructure deficits that we are having now, it's also definitely creating another problem. So if you come to schools in Gan West, schools in Wejak-Bawe area, and those peri-urban areas where to take you 20 kilometers to get to the nearest public school, what is happening is that now parents, when the children move from class 3 going to class 4, they want to place them in the public school. And then they cannot be admitted due to space because we've not been expanding the infrastructure. While some communities need a school, those who have also need expansion. And there's no plan.
I'm not getting the thing.
There's no plan for education infrastructure expansion at the basic level.
Yeah.
And so because there's no plan, the state has not made provision for that. So it is when a donor comes and say, well, maybe World Vision or any of these donors come and say, I want to support, then they do it. But then as a state, our core is that as a state, there should be a roadmap. Every year, maybe every district should have at least 4 new blocks, looking at the population and then this in the area. So if we are doing that, in no time, we should be able to overcome this because every day people are giving birth. So as they give birth, they will go to school. So we need to get...
Okay. Longmati, how do we again revert this by way of the complementary response from him, in addition to this?
Yeah, so like I was saying, for instance, when you look at the issue of school infrastructure, in 2015, 2016, for instance, we constructed, or government constructed about 1,036 schools across the country. In Greater Accra, out of the 1,036, in Greater Accra, 98 schools were constructed, okay?
Public schools.
Public schools. But then when you look at the data, you realize that as the year moves, the number decreases. So in 2020, for instance, we have 487 schools constructed, but in Greater Accra, according to the data, we have negative 29 schools. So that tells you that even existing infrastructure are no more usable. You understand? So the issue is about investing more into education and also ensuring that we construct more school buildings to accommodate the increasing numbers, because we are all aware that the youthful population is
Thank you very much. As for Divine, he's our friend. So Divine, we can always call you back so that we'll have. I think that we need to have a comprehensive discussion on this. It's a very big issue, and I was thinking about it 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think it's a concern. But Divine is with Africa Education Watch, and then also Richard, and then Festus here is a long-time person I've known in the education sector. But it's all what CAPCO is talking about, and they as a campaign are talking about the lack of access that is being created, where we're now giving the first right of choice for parents to be private schools instead of public schools, just because we're not building enough of the schools by way of just basic explanation. Okay, we're taking a break. We'll be right back, and then we'll have Neokan right here in the studio with us.